You know archaeologists, right? They're scientists that study past people by digging up stuff. Some have been working for years at the Galton Friedkin sites just north of Austin. Archaeologists working there discovered some very, very old tools. Not like in a toolkit. They didn't find a screwdriver or a wrench. These were artifacts in the ground. I think you knew that. The tools they found were older than that. Older than that. Even older than that. This stuff was seriously old. This was a big deal. Wait, pause. Hold up. For you to really get to know how big a deal this was, there's some important background information. Have you ever wondered how archaeologists prove how old something is? Archaeologists use two kinds of dating techniques, absolute dating and relative dating. Absolute dating uses some kind of sciencey test on the object itself to learn about its age. And before you ask, yes, sciencey is a real word that I just made up. On the other hand, relative dating uses logic and thinking to understand how old something is. Let's talk a little bit more about some different methods of absolute dating. Maybe you've heard of radiocarbon dating? It measures the amount of decay of this crazy radioactive isotope of carbon called carbon-14, which is present in all living things, and all things that were once living things. When stuff dies, the carbon-14 starts to break down, and the countdown begins. It's like an internal clock. Obviously, there's not like literally a clock, but if it helps, picture a clock. Charred wood from ancient campfires can help archaeologists date nearby artifacts. There's other forms of absolute dating too. They all use some kind of sciencey test on a sample. Now let's talk about different methods of relative dating. One principle of relative dating is the law of superposition. For the most part, if you've got a pile of stuff, the stuff at the bottom was put there first. Archaeologists use this bit of common sense to conclude that each layer of an archaeological site is generally older than the one above it. Like laundry in a laundry basket, or layers in a 7-layer bean dip. Another principle is seriation. People's stuff changes over time. Technology advances and styles change. If I showed this to a gamer who's super into old game systems, they'd know how old it was because this was how they did games in the 80s. Archaeology works the same way. If I showed this to an archaeologist who's super into stone tools, they'd know how old it was because this is how they did stone tools in the 80s. So, back to these guys in Texas. Oh, wait, no, pause. There's something else you really have to know. It is impossible for most people to lick their own elbow. Something else you should know is that a while back, archaeologists noticed that tools made around 13,000 years ago were distinctive looking. Archaeologists called these tools Clovis, after a town in New Mexico where they were first found with mammoth bones. I know what you're thinking. Mammoths use tools? No, they didn't. Fun thought though. They found the same type of tools in archaeological sites all over North America. For a long time, archaeologists thought the people who made Clovis tools were the very first Americans. This was their interpretation. Some people felt really sure about this. Really sure. It makes sense. People feel really sure about a lot of things. It was in textbooks. It was in museums. It was kind of a big deal. Even though Clovis first was an interpretation, people had a way of treating it like a fact. But science is all about discovering and testing new evidence. Okay, now back to our story. The Texas archaeologists had found something old. Really, really old. And they knew that because they had several lines of evidence. First of all, the Texas archaeologists found these tools in a layer beneath one containing Clovis-era tools. Second, the tools looked different. They were obviously not Clovis tools. This was strong evidence that people were in Texas before 13,000 years ago, but it wasn't an absolute date! And there was no charred wood from ancient fires for radiocarbon dating. Luckily, they found a datable sample of tiny quartz particles in the dirt alongside the tools. So, they could use optically stimulated luminescence. Which is a very fun thing to say. Optically stimulated luminescence! You should try it. Here's how the test works. Quartz has a special structure that acts as a radiation trap, sucking in radiation at a constant rate. When sunlight hits the traps, they open and radiation is released. But these tiny grains hadn't seen the sun in ages. The archaeologists collected a sample without ever letting it touch the light. In a lab, they shine a laser at the tiny grains of quartz and use special instruments to measure the radiation inside. It gives an approximate date for when the buried layers of a site were the surface, because that's when the quartz last saw the sun. Amazing! Most scientists now agree that these Texas sites offer proof that people were in North America way earlier than they thought. But we still don't really know when the first people arrived in Texas. And that's okay. That's what's cool about archaeology and all science. New evidence, new interpretations, it's always changing. There is no final frontier in science because each generation learns more than the last. In the future, new scientists, maybe even you, could make new discoveries and find new evidence.